So if you burn it, right, it says that it has to be geologically stable. So that's why they can't really find anywhere to really dump it, right? Because when, you know, an earthquake will happen and if there's a volcanic activity.
Or if it's near an aquifer, like the one in Nevada.
Yeah. Actually, we don't really know how to because of it yet. That's another con. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about disposal. Is there another aspect of it that you'd like to discuss? A question that anybody else had?
Do you think corporations should be given the power to oversee power plants because they see profit over safety sometimes?
Yeah. That's always been the case then. Profit has always been taken over safety.
But his question is, should we be allowed to supervise it? And I think probably not, because they're not protecting public safety enough. Because one of the main concerns are already public safety because of the accidents that have happened and the radioactive isotopes that they produce. So, I mean, if they're not putting safety above everything else, I don't think they should have the right to supervise.
Well, like, the only reason the government's not really supervising that much is they're afraid of it if it ever leaks. They don't want to have that responsibility on their hands, I guess. But, I don't know.
But if they can't handle the responsibility, who will?
I think they should have the power to supervise, but I don't think we really have a choice in that matter.
Well, I think it's important to remember that corporations or large corporates, they base their policies on probability. Like, it's not likely that there's going to be a nuclear meltdown, so that's how come they change policy to not account for a nuclear meltdown. So I think they shouldn't have the right because, like Tommy said, they don't put safety first. But we have to remember that their main point is profit, and so profit-wise, they don't want to have a nuclear meltdown in their future horizons. So they're not going to really account for that. Because if you look at page 18 and page 17, they talk about how nuclear power plants will fail, and the consequences are catastrophic, but the likelihood of that happening is very slim, so they don't account for that in their legislation, and the government lets them get away with it.
Well, it's obvious that these, no nuclear power plant will ever be safe, because this is a very dangerous process, of course, right? But they are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do have protocols in place, and I don't think that even if the probability is very slim and that the threat will be there, I don't think it will ever happen.
The probability will not protect the public from causing crisis of nuclear meltdown. That's in the article.
It's irresponsible to talk about small probabilities and make people rely on them. So.
Alright, do one of you four ladies here have a question you'd like to pose?
Okay, so mine's just like the general question. Do you think nuclear power plants should be allowed in the U.S.? Why or why not?
Okay, I'm at a standstill with that because in the first article it listed advantages and disadvantages, so I'm still kind of debating, but I'm more towards the advantages because compared to plants that use fossil fuel, nuclear energy is cheap and clean, the power plants cost less to operate, and they produce vast amounts of energy with little fuel, so I mean, we use a lot of energy, we need all this electricity, so I mean, if we can use less fuel to create an abundance amount, why are we so afraid to try it?
One of my questions was raised off of the advantages and disadvantages. I was reading, like, from the first article that it kept on saying that it was very clean, like, one of the advantages that it was very clean, but later in the anti-nuclear sentiment on page 2, it says thermal pollution occurs when nuclear power plants pump water from their cooling systems into nearby rivers and lakes. So they say it's so clean, and maybe like air pollution wise, but isn't it isn't it kind of contradicting itself in a way by saying?
Not necessarily though, because in Article 5, it says that they create special nature parks or wildlife sanctuaries on site. So they understand that what they're doing might harm the environment, but they're also taking precautionaries by creating these wildlife sanctuaries to help solve aquatic resource concerns.
And also they don't burn anything, so there's nothing releases to the air.
Not into the air. There's no pollution for the water. Because they're all like that. There's a reduction, if we were to use nuclear power, there'd be a reduction in air pollution and so on. But what about thermal pollution that's in the water and the fish and the ecosystems too?
Well, she is right though. There are sanctuaries from the nuclear power plant companies themselves for bald eagles and stuff like that. It's here somewhere.
It's on page 15 where it says protecting wildlife and habitats. It says because the area around a nuclear power plant is so clean, the areas around cooling ponds are often developed as environmentally rich wetlands, providing better nesting areas for waterfowl and other birds, new habitats for fish, and preservation of other wildlife, flowers, and grasses. So it is clean, and the cooling, I guess, isn't really harming the environment.
And then by reducing CO2 emissions, and then 2.61 billion metric tons between 1973 and 1999, that's a lot.
But
And
when you look at the CO2 emissions, you have to take into account that when you enrich the uranium, or whatever, or however it is that they do that, they produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So in reality, nuclear power only produces a third of the greenhouse gases that modern natural gas stations produce, so it's not really that much less.
But think of it this way, how is the uranium enriched? Can you read that to me?
As soon as I find it.
I got it. 2,000 megawatt coal-fired plants which emit large quantities of carbon dioxide. Right?
Yeah.
So they're electrical plants. Why do we use coal-fired plants when we could be using nuclear energy and therefore making the energy again free?
Well, evidently, I have no idea.
And what I think it is, I think we have the technology to do this. I think we have the ability to fix our energy crisis and our dependence on oil and fossil fuels. But I think we're either too scared or paranoid or something that might happen, and we just don't pursue it.
But is that supported by the text?
Does it have to be?
I think.
That's my opinion.
It also says that newer reactor, in Article 3 on page 8, that newer reactor designs can safely produce huge quantities of energy, and then that it will help tens of millions of people around the globe escape their energy poverty. So like Alan said, if we have the technology to do this, we should help other people that aren't able to get as much electricity as we are have it.
And yes, there are problems such as nuclear waste storage, the invention, the reprocessing of plutonium, but I think we can fix these problems as long as we pursue this energy cause.
Article 3 also says that on page 9 that it's expected to the electricity demand is going to grow 80% by 2035, and like wind energy and fossil fuels probably aren't going to cut it, so I don't think we really have a choice. We're probably going to have to rely on nuclear energy eventually. But I don't think we should keep relying on it for like centuries. I think we should, while we use it, we should probably be looking for a different, better alternative.
I think they're relied on more when demand is highest because it says that wind energy cannot be counted on to deliver electricity when demand is the highest, but that's more in dire circumstances, so I don't think we rely on it as heavily when, in general.
Article 4 states something interesting. It says that if we were to like start depending totally on nuclear energy, we only have enough viable uranium to fuel the reactors for 3 to 4 years. So
Considering that we don't reprocess.
reprocessing does not produce plutonium.
And another one.
Don't we need uranium?
Plutonium and uranium can be used in the nuclear reactions.
So basically, in order to start start depending on nuclear
This is all
reactors.
theoretically thinking that we that's with uranium mining sites on hand. Obviously, this would turn into a global scale, right? And there's obviously more than we think there is.
But do you really want a global scale of nuclear reactors?
We already have global scale offshore oil oil drilling, right?
Yeah,
Do
but
you remember the oil spills? And are those really any different?
oil spills produce cancer in fish versus humans. I think the humans would prefer the humans stay safe.
They don't explode.
But wouldn't by eating the fish, wouldn't the
They
fish?
explode.
Which is why we don't eat fish currently. We don't eat a lot.
Guys, one person at a time.
So you're saying that the entire pollution in the Gulf of Mexico, that was okay because it wasn't us?
Well, if it was a nuclear reactor that had a meltdown, say Fukushima, say all of Japan has cancer now, I think we'd never touch nuclear power again.
Good thing that didn't happen.
Yes, but since it was just oil in the Gulf of Mexico, people don't care as much. They're not going to say, let's never touch oil again.
Really, people cared a lot.
They did, but it wasn't
caused
humans who
a
died.
lot of disease and a lot of economic troubles, but that's beside the point.
Yeah,
You're stating that a nuclear problem, Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, are extensively worse than any oil problem that's happened over the past few years.
well, that's what they say it will be,
And do you believe that?
don't you?
Oh.
Where in the text does it say that?
We look at the last article. Nuclear power is never safe. If we look at the first paragraph underneath that heading, nuclear power plants will fail. When they do, the consequences are catastrophic for individuals and society. I think it's implying that the consequences will be pretty bad. Like, it'd be terrible, but for humans.
But it doesn't say why it will fail.
It just
that
says
it's
it
sure
will.
fail.
But
It doesn't explain it.
Eventually, but
Are you saying like if there were to be a nuclear accident?
Yeah.
On page 3 in 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, it says that Chernobyl was the worst recorded nuclear accident in history, which caused a combination of mismanagement and faulty plant design. But then it's the last sentence of that paragraph. It says, however, a 2000 report by the United Nations Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation found that the cancer death rate in the area had not increased noticeably in the 14 years after.
and also
accident.
also no new nuclear reactor. That's an accident.
So Chernobyl is the worst nuclear accident in history, right? However, we can name thousands of oil accidents that have been caused. The Exxon Valdez in Alaska, the recent one in the Gulf of Mexico, and they've been far more catastrophic than Chernobyl.
But how much longer have we been using coal and fossil
Exactly.
fuels?
Also, Chernobyl was when nuclear energy was still a baby. We were still testing it. We, as it states there with the
1986.
the faulty management and faulty placing. So, is it really worth it just to ignore nuclear energy?
I don't think we should ignore it, I just don't think we should depend on it.
You can't depend on it if you never give it a chance. People are too paranoid and too scared to even try it.
Yeah, so we'll never get the chance
The
to
fact
depend on it.
that we haven't revisited this technology since 1978, that no new reactors have been built, really just shows that we're too paranoid to try something new, or that we're too much in the stranglehold of the oil corporations to really do anything.
I don't think it's so much as the oil corporation's fault, as much as the public opinion of nuclear reactors.
Which is, of course, influenced by lobbyists, right? People
And
paid by the oil
specialists.
corporations.
Let me turn the conversation a little bit to the science of it. Do you know what the science is involved in the nuclear plant and how kind of related to the advantages of that?
Fission
And fusion.
and fusion.
The only keywords I highlighted.
So through
By splitting
fusion, we are able to fuse two atoms together, and that causes heat which is a form of energy that's released that produces
Water to boil.
the water to boil.
And spin the turtle.
But don't we not use fusion yet because it's too hard to control?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's too hot.
It's and it must be done under very, very, very hot temperatures.
So right now we're using what?
Fission. The nucleus of an atom is split apart into 2 smaller nuclei.
But isn't that very dangerous? Because isn't that how the atomic bomb is like done, like splitting apart atoms?
Yeah, but it's a different way.
Oh, okay.
So, is there an advantage if we develop fusion versus fission?
This depends on how you control it.
Yeah. There was
Theoretically, if fusion is like smashing together 2 nuclei and fission is splitting them apart, could we reuse our uranium?
No.
That's not how it works.
Break them and put them back together.
Well, theoretically.
No, they're not Legos. No.
The fusion is hydrogen atoms fusing together into helium.
Okay.
And the fission is taking the uranium and going through the chain reaction.
So it's because so the nuclear fission, the one that breaks it apart, it produces a lot of energy in which its heat is used to boil water and generate steam. But then the fusion, which is the fusing and producing larger nuclei, it's hasn't been used because it requires extremely high temperatures and it's difficult to contain once it has begun. That's what paragraph 2 says. Page 1.
Alright, does anybody have any more questions? Maybe one of you two?
I was wondering, like, if there were other elements that we could use other than uranium. Yeah.
One of the articles mentioned thorium. Thorium, yeah. I'm not sure where though. It was an alternative, yeah.
Oh, it's Article 3.
Adding the potential of thorium to replace uranium as a reactor fuel, and in doing so reduce production of weapons-grade radioactive materials, and it becomes apparent that the nuclear age is far from over.
So do you guys think that's something we should pursue?
I think so.
Definitely.
Nuclear power?
No, using thorium to replace uranium.
Essentially finding elements that can not cause a nuclear war to come along.
Yeah, if we use thorium instead, America wouldn't ban reprocessing since plutonium would be out of the question. And we have much more efficient nuclear plants.
Why is plutonium created during the reprocessing? Science-wise, what do we learn about?
Alpha decay happens.
They didn't really explain what reprocessing was.
But from what you
Reprocessing
know,
chemically is like, I guess
Isn't it alpha decay or beta or one of?
plutonium has a higher atomic number than uranium.
Yeah,
Oh,
alpha.
so it's alpha, right?
alpha goes down by 4 and 2.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it
never mind.
goes up.
Never mind.
Which one increases the atomic number?
Electron capture.
Or positron emission.
Those ones decrease it. It's beta
Beta.
that increases.
Oh.
I was on this like track somewhere.
So that would be undergoing beta capture to get to there. But in normal, like in the atomic bomb, what kind of radiation is happening?
Splitting atoms apart.
So,
Alpha decay.
They're just like
So they must be doing something during the reprocessing